Hi fifth graders, this video is on how we're going to simplify fractions. So we did this during our whole group, but just in case you needed a refresher, you missed it, here's what you're going to be doing. So you're going to start with your blank sheet of paper, and at the top you're going to write simplifying fractions. Draw a big line underneath so we know that our title is simplifying fractions. So there are 3 steps to simplifying fractions. We've got a handful of vocab terms in here too that we'll work on defining as we go through. So you can draw a 1 and circle it. Our very first step, step number 1, is going to be to write the factors. So let's start off with the fraction. Let's do 6/8. You can write it big over here. This is what we're going to be working with. We're going to do 6/8 for our simplifying fractions anchor chart. So our first step is to write the factors. So we can make a little note too if it helps you to remember that factors are what we multiply together to get a number. So that's where we're going to do our little sideways T-chart. We're going to find the factors of 6 and the factors of 8. So this is not where we're finding a common denominator. We are not listing the multiples. We're listing the factors. So I know that 1 and 6 are factors of 6 because when I do 1 times 6, I get 6. And I know that 3 and 2 are factors of 6 because 3 times 2 equals 6. For 8, I know that 1 and 8 are factors of 8 because when I multiply them together, I get 8, as well as 2 and 4. So step number 1 is to write our factors, and it's really easy if we set it up in this T-chart. I'm going to move it down just a little bit to make room for my next step. Step number 2 is to find the GCF. Now that is an acronym that we have not been very familiar with yet this year. The GCF is the greatest common factor. So that is a fancy way of saying what is the biggest number that's the same in the top row and in the bottom row. You can go ahead and you can always circle all of the common factors that you have, but you can also just go ahead and circle the greatest common factor. So I see that I have a 1 in both of the rows, and I have a 2 in both of the rows. So my greatest common factor, so for this step I use purple, I'm going to circle it in purple up here. My greatest common factor is 2. So step number 1 was to write our factors. Step number 2 was to find the greatest common factor. If you do this step and the only common factor you have is 1, then you know that it is as simple as it can be and you cannot simplify it anymore. But since we had a bigger number than 1, we had 2. That is what we are going to be using as our greatest common factor, and that brings us to step number 3. Step number 3 is to divide by the GCF. So we're going to divide our fraction by our greatest common factor. So we're going to take 6/8. We are going to divide it by what number? By 2. 6 divided by 2 equals 3. And 8 divided by 2 equals 4. So the simplified fraction of 6/8 is 3/4. These are equivalent fractions, remember. This is just in a more simple form. That means that the numbers are smaller and easier for us to deal with. Let's go ahead just like we did in our group time, and we're going to draw like a little squiggly line down here at the bottom where we're going to do another example. And instead of writing out all the steps again, I'm going to just show myself in a simple version what an example would look like if I had a different fraction and was dealing with some different numbers here. So let's do 12/15. So I'm going to say step number 1 is where I do 12 and 15, and I'm writing my factors. So I've got my T-chart down here. My factors, I've got 1 and 12. See, 3 times 4 equals 12, and 6 times 2 equals 12. So I had quite a few factors here. For 15, I know 1 times 15 equals 15. And I know that 5 times 3 equals 15. So I completed step 1. I listed all of my factors. Step 2 is to circle find and circle my greatest common factor. So I'm going to look through and let's see. I see that I have 1s in common. What else do I have? Oh, it looks like I have 3s in common. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to circle my 3s. Step number 3 is to divide by the greatest common factor. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say step 3, 12/15. Divide. You have to divide the top and the bottom. Whatever we do to the bottom, we do to the top. Dividing them both by 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So my simplified answer of 12/15 is 4